Two more Wicklow TDs to speak. Cahirlach and colleagues, I warmly welcome the opportunity today to discuss the upcoming surrogacy legislation following the work of the Special Oireachtas Joint Committee on International Surrogacy. I'd like to acknowledge the enormous efforts over many years of many advocates and the surrogacy groups, some of whom are with us today in the visitors gallery, and you're all very welcome here to Dáil Éireann. It has been my great honour and my great pleasure to meet with parents and their beautiful children, as well as many others who want nothing more than to have children of their own. I've listened carefully to their stories, to their journeys to parenthood, the struggles, the costs, the heartache, the hope, and in many cases, the unbridled joy of becoming parents to their wonderful children. And to these parents, I say this: you must have full recognition and rights under the law as the parents of your children. Your children deserve, your children must have, and your children will have the full protections of parental recognition and associated rights. That is what our new legislation does. The legislation we're finalising provides a full retrospective route for you and for your children. This is what we're finalising now to bring to the Health Committee, and this is what will be available to you via the courts when this legislation is passed. I've instructed my officials to ensure that retrospective parental orders do not require the establishment of the new authority, which will take some time, and they're engaging with the AG to do everything that can be done to make sure that the legislation is drafted to that effect. And to those looking to become parents, I'd like to say this: this legislation will, in the first instance, regulate and advance assisted human reproduction services. And in parallel with the legislation, we're rolling out an entirely new national network of fertility hubs, new assisted human reproduction services, and implementing later this year for the first time state funding for IVF. The legislation will also regulate domestic as well as international surrogacy, which of course is the main focus of today's discussion. I think we can all agree that the undertaking of surrogacy arrangements in other jurisdictions raises complex, practical issues to be addressed. To consider these, Government agreed to establish the Special Committee in February of last year. I know the members put in long hours, and the results of their efforts was, I believe, a very balanced, a very thoughtful, and a very important piece of work. I'd like to take the opportunity, Cahirlach, to thank the members of the committee for their work and to thank the chair of the committee, Deputy Whitmore, for her work in particular. The committee published its final report in July, which includes a total of 32 recommendations. An extensive piece of work was then carried out by the three line departments in respect of this. Ultimately, last December, the recommendation to government from myself, Minister McEntee and Minister O'Gorman was to accept either fully or partially 30 of the report's 32 recommendations. The rationale for not including the other two recommendations stems from additional protections we wanted in place for the surrogate and intending parents in terms of ensuring that court hearings can be scheduled, and secondly, ensuring that all children who are eligible for the parental orders get the benefits of these orders in a reasonable period of time. And I've met with the representative groups to discuss the amendments, to discuss the vast majority of recommendations which we're taking on, the ones we're not, and the rationale for that. And I'm happy to say there was broad agreement as to the approach that had been adopted. I also want to acknowledge additional issues which have been raised with me, including concerns raised by LGBT Ireland, Irish families through surrogacy, other individuals and other groups. And I'd like to say to them that I've listened very carefully to what you've said. We've discussed the concerns with officials, and these are being addressed to the greatest extent possible through the final stages of the drafting process. It's worth noting that legislation as complex as this can take a long time, sometimes several years, to work its way through the system. Indeed, there is legislation that I'm bringing through final stages at the moment that my Wicklow colleague, Minister Harris, will have started many years previously. Legislation not as complex as what we're dealing with here. And so government wanted to ensure that this did not become a multi-year process following the committee's report. And so to that end, I wrote to the Attorney General before Christmas to request the prioritisation of the formal drafting process. And I'm very happy to be able to report to the House that legislative drafting that might at times have taken years is instead being done in a matter of months. And I must acknowledge the huge efforts being made by officials in all three line departments and the efforts being made by drafters and by legal advisors in the Attorney General's office to make sure that this happens. As of this morning, officials were on version 8 of the legislative amendments. I think in the version I have here, they're called version 7C. But that'll give you a sense for just how much work is going into making sure that this legislation is right. I am confident that when published, the amendments will reflect the proposals put forward by the committee, insofar, obviously, as is possible to do. Now, to timing, which is one of the questions Deputy Whitmore has raised, and that many of the groups we met in the last hour have raised as well. It's my intention that this work will be finalised, that we will seek and hopefully secure government agreement on the final bill and on the surrogacy amendments, and that I will send all of that to the Health Committee for their consideration for scheduling for committee stage during this Dáil term, during the summer term, so before the Dáil rises in mid-July. Now, the scheduling of committee stage, which will most likely involve very substantial proposed amendments. There may be opposition amendments. I'm certainly bringing in amendments, is ultimately a matter for that committee. There are amendments to 11 parts of the bill and 134 pages of legislation as it currently stands. In effect, we are bringing in amendments which are of the scale and complexity of a full bill in and of themselves. So it's up to the Health Committee to decide when it's going to schedule committee stage. Nonetheless, it's my hope that the Health Committee will be able to find time in what is a very busy schedule for them so that we can have the committee hearings. I can bring it back to the Dáil for report and final stages. I can bring it through the Seanad, and we can get this passed through all stages of the Oireachtas and up to the President during this Dáil term. We can't guarantee that, because there are many moving parts and there are many different groups involved. So it's not in my gift to guarantee that. What I can say is that is the absolute determination of myself, of Minister Harris, of Minister O'Gorman, of government, and I think there is broad political support right across both houses for this. So that is our determination, to have this with the President by the time the Dáil rises and the Oireachtas rises in the summer term. I'm not aware of any other country that has attempted to provide such a bespoke and such a comprehensive legislative solution, incorporating a preconception approval model to issues arising from its own citizens engaging in surrogacy arrangements in other jurisdictions. I know that in much of the rest of Europe, and indeed further afield, legislators, academics and others are looking with keen interest at us right now as to what we're planning, what our legislation will do. This is an area we really are pioneering. In the UK, the Law Commission last month, for example, published recommendations for their own surrogacy laws in a report that took 5 years, and I imagine legislation for them will take some time. Our finalised new surrogacy amendments will be significantly expanded from and much more detailed than both the broad recommendations in the committee report and the proposals approved by government before Christmas, obviously, as we turn this into the final legislation. I'm very much looking forward to passing the legislation, both for the original elements concerning assisted human reproduction and the new elements concerning international surrogacy. I'd like, Chair, to finish by again recognising the work of the committee, of advocates and of officials in getting us to this place. These parents and these children deserve full parental recognition, and that is exactly what we are going to do. Guramagat.